And we are live with the webinar. Sharon, over to you.
Thank you. Thank you for joining the CIPS Victoria branch webinar on the topic of change management, harnessing the power of digital. We are really delighted to be able to connect with procurement professionals from all over the world today at this extraordinary time. It really is unprecedented times, and we know that you're all facing catastrophic disruption and stress caused by the coronavirus outbreak. And we really appreciate your willingness to accommodate our change, excuse me, from face-to-face an event into virtual. Thank you. Thank you for joining us, and for those who don't know us, the Chartered Institute of Procurement and Supply, or CIPS, is your global professional body for procurement and supply professionals. We are dedicated to promoting best practice, continuous improvement in professional standards, and raising awareness of the contribution that procurement and supply management can make to organisations. With over 70,000 members globally, we are also the world's largest provider of specialised training in all aspects of procurement and supply. And we're extremely proud of our mandate to act in the public interest and for the benefit of the procurement profession as a whole. We act as a voice for the profession, and our role is also to help our members to become better professionals and support the organisations to improve their procurement processes. We are also proud of the global body of knowledge for our procurement and supply, and we have the global standard or the competency framework for the profession. In this current climate, I feel it's never been more important to connect with people. Our virtual connections have never been so critical, and I believe our role as your professional body is to amplify our connectedness and support procurement professionals at this time. So that leads us to our knowledge sharing in the form of today's webinar, free for all of us to attend. The theme of change management, harnessing the power of digital, could not be more timely. Like all organisations in the current climate, CIPS is moving swiftly through its own transformation and accelerating the release of digital and virtual learning experiences. We also need to be more agile to bring people on the journey, which takes understanding, leadership, risk, and continual evolution of our capabilities. Because we're here to help people lean in, raise their competency level, and build the profile of the profession. Today, we have over 250 registered attendees, people from all over the region and further afield. And I'm delighted to be welcoming and representing the professional body as General Manager for CIPS Australia and New Zealand. To all attendees, a very, very warm welcome. I'd also like to acknowledge the traditional owners of many lands on which we meet today. And now I hand over to our Fellow of the Profession and Chair of the Victorian CIPS branch, Phil Chalkley, our host and moderator for today's webinar.
Thanks, Sharon. Welcome, everyone. As Sharon has mentioned, I'm the chair of the CIPS Victorian branch committee, and I'm also the host and moderator for today's webinar. Before I begin, just some housekeeping. Today's webinar will be recorded and will be made available to the participants next week. So look out for that when it's published. Also, all attendees are muted during the presentation. However, at the bottom, you will have the opportunity there is a QA box at the bottom of the webinar, which allows you to send to myself some questions that you may pose during the presentation and discussion today. And we look forward to the opportunity to answering those questions during the event, during the Q&A component of the event. Without further ado, what I'd like to do is introduce our first speaker, David Charles from GEP. David is currently the GEP Transformation Consulting lead. Dave brings over 30 years of experience in change management, core model design, process and system design, implementation, optimization, and digital transformation. David has held senior procurement management positions across the industry and also worked with Accenture and Procurement. And so David has also managed offshore and multi-shore teams in managing process improvement and continuous improvement, and always looking to provide value to his relevant clients or customers. So what I'd like to do is welcome David and for David to provide the first part of our webinar today in the presentation with respect to change management in the context of procurement. David?
Thanks, Phil. I appreciate it. And hello to all. It's a little different not being able to look in your faces and say hello more personally, but the world is a little different than it was a few weeks ago. So today we're going to talk about change management. And there's a lot of different directions we could go. We're going to try to touch on a couple of different aspects. So what is change management? We'll stay away from the fundamentals, as you probably all know, but what's going on in procurement these days, the whole digitalization of procurement, and what do we have to do to keep up with that as far as change management goes? What's going on in the world, and how do we deal with new tools within the change management? So if you could go to the first slide, please. If you could move to the next slide, please. Thank you. I always start with this, and ironically, over the last couple of weeks, this has become perhaps less of a standard as it always was. But there was a rear admiral in the U.S. Navy years ago who was a really phenomenal woman. If you have a chance to look up Grace Hopper, computer scientist, and in the Navy, lots of contributions. But her sort of key quote that she coined was, most dangerous phrase in the English language is, "We've always done it this way." And how true that is. Any of us who have led projects, who have come up with ideas, who have tried to implement change, are always faced with the hurdle of, we've always done it this way. And that's really the driving reason for so much of what we do today. But moving on to the next slide, you'll see that really this has been wiped out in the last couple of weeks. We're now in new ground. We're doing things we've never done before. We're doing things in ways that we've never done before. And it's a lot of change. And what we need to do is consider, how do we digest this change? So what's going on? Changes in life as we know it. Forget about work, just life. Social distancing, getting used to conference calls with your workforce, with dogs barking in the background, and the unpredicted economic downturns, all of the bars, the restaurants, things that are closed up to the public, at least here in the US, are really causing a lot of economic hardship that could not have been predicted. This was not something that could have been forecast or so forth. So life is changing as we know it, and life in the procurement world is changing. The pandemic has huge effects on supply chain. We're seeing single, or in many cases multiple, point of failures in what was a stable supply chain. The reduction in supplier capacity because of a lack of workforce, or perhaps a lack of raw material availability. Economic shutdown, companies just plain needing to go out of business, or being forced to close their doors as part of the containment process. And travel bans. Interestingly, this group here, not getting together and seeing each other, but doing this remotely, much of that based on travel limitations. So the world is different, and we need to manage the change. And you can see there, we always used to historically call this change management. And that was what everybody has already coined it. And we've recently moved to management of change because it's really different. We know that this change is coming, always. We're changing so fast in our world. And what do we have to do to really manage that, to stay on top of that, and make this a whole sort of scope in and of itself? If you can move on to the next slide, I want to start with procurement. What's going on in the procurement world? You know, if we look at traditional procurement, it was always the 4 key areas. We started with your spend analytics, you went through your sourcing, your category management, and then through your transaction management. A very linear approach, and it worked for years. And suddenly we've introduced a lot of new capabilities, the Internet of Things, artificial intelligence, bots, and we're now looking at a procurement world that is no longer linear, but is more molecular in design, where each aspect of procurement and everything we do is intertwined and interrelated, and even more so tied together with artificial intelligence. So some cases, decisions being made, directions set, without any of us in the procurement world even making those decisions ourselves. So it's a hard world to adjust to. There's a lot of change going on, and we have to address issues that were never even conceived of before. If you move to the next slide, please, we'll see that the world of procurement has progressed itself. So, not dating myself, going back to when I began my career, a buyer was a buyer. That's what we did. We bought, we negotiated, we found best prices. And our whole goal was, how do we buy better? It was a very reactive situation. People came in and said, I need to buy this, and we went out and we found it, and we found better prices and so forth. We moved to a spend better environment. Instead of buy better, how do we spend better? How do we create strategic partnerships with our suppliers? How do we measure the total cost of ownership and look at the end supply chains as the experts? And really, how do we take that pool of money that we have and spend it better? But what we're being challenged with in procurement right now is future proofing. How do we plan better? And the technology interaction is crazy at this point. There's technology now that as somebody takes a can of soup off the shelf in a grocery store, that data is transmitted back to not only the supplier, the creator, the manufacturer of the soup, but the supplier of the ingredients going into that. Real-time estimates of usage of their given product and what their future usage will need. So we're really looking at how do we better plan. And there's no time like the current example of what's going on to say, how do we future-proof ourselves? What do we need to do to stay agile in a procurement world? To find diversification, to use disruptive technology to be more effective and efficient in change, and use digitalization to become scalable. How many of you out there today are wishing you were in the office because you had a contract sitting on your desk in paper copy? It's just an outdated mechanism that's not going to work in the world today. We have to future-proof ourselves, be ready for change, and become very strategic in our approach. So if we move to the next slide, where is this really going? As you can see, where we are today, where we've been in the past, it's really the procurement organization brought value to the organization through people. We had buyers, we had category managers, setting strategy, driving pricing, creating contracts. What we're moving to in the future is a much more fluid workforce, a much leaner environment where the people who are there will be highly skilled, focused on strategic issues, and all of the more tactical events will be taken care of through optimization, technology, automation, analytics. And so we as a procurement have to prepare ourselves for change and be able to manage the change, not only amongst ourselves, but with our business partners, with our suppliers, and with all of those around us who are relying on our services, our management as well. Moving to the next slide, we're going to talk about what does this mean for us in the procurement from our skills. We can no longer be just a great negotiator. We can't be the category expert that we used to be. We can't even necessarily be the strategic thinker. We have to become leaders in the change management perspective. So when we're talking about leaders, how do we now drive collaboration, acceptance, partnership with suppliers. Things that used to be done by the business are now falling back into procurement for us to manage. So as we're introducing this sort of transformational thinking, you know, and driving digitalization and faster, effective efficiencies, you know, throughout the procurement process, we have to be the change leaders. There's no separate group we're going to call in to manage the change. We as the procurement group have to be the change leaders within the organization. And this is whether we're doing a project, a system implementation, a transformation, whatever your role is within the organization, we need to pick up the role as a change leader. The next slide is exemplary of, as we go into projects within GEP here, you know, if we're doing a transformation process, change management is one of the core pillars. It cannot be a secondary afterthought that most companies, you know, sort of often view it as, where, oh, if we have time, we'll send out some communications, or, you know, oh, we'll talk to somebody ahead of time. There's much more to it than that. And change management has to be one of the key cogs in your plans, in your projects, in your negotiations, so that you can move forward effectively in a procurement organization. And then the next slide, going on to, not only is change management around the technical side, the process changes, the digitalization, but keep in mind the emotional side, the people side of the change. What's going on in the hearts and minds of people? The world today is a fantastic example. We've been talking digitalization for years. You know, get paper copies off the desk and have everything virtual, cloud-based information, analytics being thrown at you in real time. We're experiencing the requirements, the need for that today as we all work from home. We're all meeting remotely, and it's really driving the urgency of getting this done. But you also have to consider, you know, we're all sitting at home. Many of us locked home with our friends, our families, or not our friends, but our families, or alone. There is an emotional side to every change. And as a change leader, you need to be aware of this. You need to be involved with this. It's critical for us to deliver the absolute benefits of a project, a negotiation, the new way of thinking, by not only looking at the process and the technology, but how are people accepting this? What's going on in their minds, and how do we overcome the resistance? Moving to the next slide, we have our layout of our key change management. Now you're going to see this. This is fairly standardized in a lot of businesses as we're doing management of change. The analysis, strategy, planning, mobilization, implementation, 5 key steps to the change management process. And if we had time, we would go through these because this is really, you know, change management 101. But I'd say what has changed in our world, and let's just flip to the next slide and keep going as we're running short on time already, is things are now different. You know, as we're thinking about change, we need to not only manage the existing change, the current change, what you've been accustomed to, but as a change leader, we need to be proactive in thinking about what is the upcoming changes and being strategic and ready for change when it occurs. How do we do this? There's a couple of things we need to focus on. Things like alignment with risk management. Risk management has been a huge part of procurement over the last couple of years, really getting hot in the procurement world. But as a change leader, you need to look at saying, okay, we're managing the risk, but what if these things happen? What if events happen? What if a pandemic comes around? What if a supplier shuts down? What do we do? How do we change? And we can't wait until an event happens to map out what our change management process will be. So as a leader, as you're setting your category plans, as you're setting negotiation strategies, think about change management. Think about how do we examine the effects, the impacts to people, not only process technology, but their heart, their feelings, their emotions. and how do we prepare ourselves to address that change in a proactive fashion. Things like moving to digitalization, key examples, as we've talked about. Get it done proactively, manage that change. And quite honestly, now this pandemic that is happening is giving us as an organization a key chance to drive the need for huge amounts of change through the organization, because people suddenly get it, they understand. What's going on now is with digitalization, just to try to tie that in a little bit more, the more immediate, effective communication is necessary. People expect relevant content, no fake news. That letter from the CEO doesn't cut it anymore. They need what's in it for me kind of information at their desktop immediately. New communication types, new types of training, speed to market. You need to be reactive immediately to a change in the organization, or you lose the emotional attachment of the individuals being affected. And oddly enough, sometimes change management is really managing change. It says sometimes that's stay the course. How do we prevent unnecessary swings in things like procurement strategy, stockpiling and overbuying because we've just experienced a very bad part of our economy. So how, as a change manager, do you go in and effectively help to manage that change as it's occurring or before it's occurring? I had a couple more slides, but if you skip down 2 more slides, as we're out of our time already, I think the one thing I just want to emphasize, and just go down to the last slide, please, it's 2 more, is the quote from Bill Gates. It's really key to me. Strategy without execution is a dream. Execution without strategy is a nightmare. And when you think about change management, and I apologize for not being able to get into details of more how are we doing things and what are we, how do we address certain key aspects of it. But my key message for tonight is change management requires upfront thinking. It requires strategy. And especially in the digital world and the way things are changing, things are so fast, they're moving so quickly. The expectations for instant information, instant communications are so imminent that you cannot wait for change to happen. We have to manage it by thinking ahead of time, predicting change, and being ready for it as it comes. So with that, I'll thank you for your time today, and I'll pass it back to Phil.
Many thanks, David. That was really valuable presentation, really your input and insights in there. Just a friendly reminder to everyone that if you've got any questions, if you could use the QA box at the bottom of your screen to address questions. That's where I'm following the QA box for collecting of questions for David or any of our upcoming panel members. So thank you. We'd now like to progress into the panel. We've got David will be joining us on the panel, so I don't need to reintroduce David, but we've got Andrew McFarlane, a FCIPS fellow on the panel. Andrew is the head of procurement at McConnell Dow. He's responsible and leading a number of transformations as we speak, and in a tier 1 infrastructure and construction company. Andrew has over 20 years experience in procurement across a variety of industries and has overseen many much change or many transformations or projects which have gone through different approaches to how they've been delivered, and we really look forward to Andrew participating and answering some of our questions. We also have Belinda Lloyd with us. Belinda is the director at Changing Circumstances Consultancy. Belinda is a change management organisational design expert, been in senior executive roles across, again, quite a diverse industry groups. Recently, Belinda worked in a transport industry, being the lead change specialist there around driving the transformation change and informing the different streams how that change journey would occur and the best mechanism to deliver that change. And again, we really value Belinda's participation in this webinar. What I'd like to do is, firstly, I'll go to Andrew. Andrew, from your perspective, what initiates the need for consideration of change management, and in particular, around digital, for a particular project? What's your thoughts?
Yeah, thanks, Phil. So just by way of context, so I'm currently leading a project, a digitization project for the plant management processes within the business. While it's not procurement, it still has a lot of the consistent principles. So in terms of initiating the project, it actually came organically up through the business and actually was an IT project, and it was struggling for a couple of months. And then we had an internal audit which highlighted the inefficient and ineffective processes we had around plant management within the business, and that led to it being shifted from an IT project to effectively being managed by the function, and effectively I'm wearing a plant management hat at the moment. And with senior management focus, the project has now progressed well. And really it's been my experience with step change projects, you do need the senior management committee very involved in buying into and tracking the progress of the report of the project. And the other thing I would say is that also typically these step change projects need a lot of resources, typically cross-functional resources, and they take time. And so to keep that focus and momentum going, it does typically need senior management focus. So I think that answers the question. Yeah, thanks, Phil.
David, your experiences, I'll touch on digital change management, using, digital tools to connect, the stakeholders and the participants in the change. What do you see as some of the benefits that can bring in, and considering the date where we are today with all these movements happening, globally? How do you see the benefits of using digital change management tools?
It's really phenomenal because I think in the past, what you've been, accustomed to, you started out with the memo from the CEO or the key stakeholder announcing a project, and perhaps there was a monthly newsletter or a random posting on a website. And, it's great. It keeps people informed. But in today's world, it's almost a little bit of, always what's in it for me, as an individual. And with the ability to have new digital technologies involved, blogs, Twitter accounts, being utilized in corporate environments, just shared resource centers, whether it's a SharePoint or Microsoft Teams or whatever. With the digital tools that are out there now, the ability to get that information out to more people in a faster manner, but probably more importantly, in a more contextual setting. So people can see the things that are relevant to them. They don't have to be generic corporate-wide announcements, that sort of appease the masses, but don't provide any information. You can get detailed information into the hands of the people who need to know, and that makes people more comfortable. The more comfortable people are, the more buy-in you'll get, the less resistance to the change. And so that's, you know, it's been a huge, I think, overhaul in the change management process by being able to get into a more digital context and get that information out, share concerns. You know, if you're working with somebody on the phone, just, you know, hey, let me show you, let me, you know, pull up my screen and let me show you, you know, exactly what I'm talking about. You know, tools that never existed before that have become very commonplace now are really helping us to quell the fears of people, which really is what you want from a change management perspective to help your process, your project, your change get through more smoothly.
Excellent. Thank you, David. Belinda, what do you see as a change expert? What do you see some of the major challenges that comes with digital change management as against, say, the traditional methods of change management?
Okay, so firstly, good afternoon, everyone. I'm so pleased to have you all out there. Look, some of the challenges, I think, in fact, if anything, having a digital environment helps change management, most certainly. I absolutely agree with David in the sense that we have come a long way, and now, particularly in the communication space, for example, it's much easier to get information out to people. So gone are the posters in lunchrooms. And if I take, for example, the transport organisation that I was working with late last year, one of the great things that I think they did is developed their own app. And so we all know, for example, that today everyone has a smartphone, or just about everyone. If not, some will have more than one, I'm sure. So we assume that people are able to actually use a smartphone. And this particular organisation developed its own app. So therefore, its bus drivers, its train drivers and ferry drivers could access information really quickly. And it was within their hands within seconds. And they didn't have to wait to go back to that lunchroom or back to a computer or a PC and what have you. So they got the information when they needed it. And they were able to respond also in terms of discussion threads and so forth, in terms of asking questions about whatever it was that they were receiving. So I certainly think from that perspective, it's been great, as opposed to the traditional elements that David absolutely referred to, where you're getting this blanket bland piece of information. So the information is now tailored based on the target audience that it's aimed at. So similarly within that same organisation, in the collaboration space, where you're wanting senior leaders to come together to be able to come up with ideas in terms of the way the new look and feel of that particular change is going to present itself, things like using Slack is a great idea, because what they were doing, and again, regional challenges, people being in different parts of Australia, for example, were able to use that particular app in order to be able to continue to do those things. Where once upon a time, you'd be flying everyone into workshops and spending large amounts of money on accommodation and the like. And whilst those things are still very important to have, having that sort of environment where you can do it when it suits you is equally beneficial. And obviously, given the current environment we're in as well, it certainly helps all organisations to continue to do whatever they need. The final comment on that in terms of what this new approach adds as an addition to the traditional ways of doing change management, I think is also in the e-learning space. So again, you've got people being able to do things by themselves when they are okay to do them, and log in or come in and do a particular piece of learning and then come out again. So they can do it when it works for them. And if they're feeling uncomfortable or feeling a little bit resistant to change, they can become familiar with whatever it is that they need to learn in an environment that works well for them. And again, if it's backed up and supported by feedback mechanisms, so discussion threads and those sorts of things, then people are able to also then respond quite quickly to whatever it is that someone else might need in terms of additional support. So they've kind of got, in a way, I think, both support mechanisms. So a bit of the traditional, which is what you would get from the face-to-face, and then also the opportunity to be able to learn things in their own time at their own pace. I think that's probably enough for me.
Thanks, Belinda. Andrew, has the involvement of digitisation made projects or change management, in your experience, more complex?
Yeah, yes, is a short answer. As I was saying, I'm midway through a digitisation project with our plant management, and we are going through what you'd call a fairly simple process of design, build, and then implementation. And once we've got through the design process and we started to build, we've now found that in a digitised world, we're having to go back and relook at the design and then rebuild, and we've got a circular process going on to ensure that we optimize the build of the digital app effectively. And previously in a non-digitized world, we would not have had that happening. We would have just laid down what the content was in a manual format and worked with that. But now we're in a digitized world, we're finding we are having to reassess, and as we progress and build, we're realizing there are further opportunities. So there's no doubt about it. In a digitized world, it is more complex. You know, the complications typically for us are in the areas of working out the right workflows that we should incorporate, eliminating duplication, which was inherent in the system, decomplicating and streamlining processes, and also then establishing the notifications that come out of a digital application, which are incredibly valuable, but you need to set them appropriately. So there's no doubt that the projects, these digital projects, are certainly more complex than in the more traditional model.
Okay.
I think that's probably enough. Yeah.
Okay. Thanks, Andrew. And Belinda, I'll come back to you. Last question of the panel. What is inside the mind of change resistors? We've all experienced them in implementing a program, a change, where people are, you know, very reluctant, often, you know, for multiple reasons. And so what's in the mind of a resistor that digital change management mitigates or assists in addressing that or preventing that resistance?
Sure, thanks, Phil. So first of all, what is in the mind of a resistor? So generally, people are quite fearful of change for obvious reasons. It adds another layer of complexity in an already complicated world. Sometimes people just want to get in there and do their jobs and go off and do other things, for example. So the things that people are considering are things like, what is changing? How will it affect me? In fact, I hope it doesn't even affect me. Can I cope with it? What else have I got going on in my external world, for example, outside of work? Will the changes impact my job performance? We all know there's a bit of a lag time around learning new things. Will I be able to match what my peers do, for example? Can I do it as well as them? So how do we help eliminate or reduce? Because we can't always, obviously, eliminate all of those facets, but we can certainly aim and strive to reduce them. So what we're looking at doing is reducing ambiguity about the change. We're looking at providing lots of explanation around what it is. We're looking at providing lots of visibility. We're looking at ensuring that competence is increased, for example, and that people actually understand what it is that is expected of them. So we're being what I call fair and reasonable. We're managing perceptions and expectations. So if there is workload increase, we are talking about that. So how does that then link back to mitigating resistors? Well, with respect to a digital world, one of the key things, and I alluded a little bit about this before, is that I like how quick and easy you can get information out to people. Like I said, if you've got a smartphone, you've got an app, and you can get that information to people very, very quickly, way more quicker than traditional methods. And it can be tailored based on the target audience that you're addressing, because you would expect there to be a number of target audiences. So you target the target audience, you send out the information quickly. And obviously, having this sort of technology is never going to be able to mitigate good old-fashioned things like a very strong change management strategy that executes a good comms plan and change impact assessments and the like. And in fact, all of those things should have what kind of digital environments you're looking at and include those in there. But certainly things like having apps where you can get quick, relevant, succinct, timely information out to people via comms is very important, because that helps alleviate some of the stresses we talked about before. Being able to have strong e-learning facilities where people can get on and off when they want to actually learn, supported by strong feedback looping mechanisms where you are able then to provide additional support or clarification if things are needed. So it certainly definitely has its space and is able to improve and reduce the resistors aspects on the change that we are implementing, I think. And particularly too with e-learning, if you're able to, and obviously most of these e-learning platforms are able to do this, but you can, if it's, for example, if there's a technology change, you can literally have exactly what that system is looking like, and they are almost in there doing it themselves. So that's building confidence, for example, and so forth. So they are able to pretty much do whatever it is now, rather than looking through a workbook that you would once do, and then you get online and practice in some sandpit training scenario, for example, which would happen 10, 15 years ago. So I really like the idea about real time. I like the idea of real time, so therefore it's reducing that rumour mongering, perhaps, shall we say. E-learning is great for being able to simulate exactly whatever it is that they need to do when this new change comes in, which builds confidence and competence and reduces fear. And then equally with things like Slack, as I mentioned earlier, you've got scenarios where you can build true collaboration and you don't need to be in the same room. So that's empowering people also, because as we all know, if people have an opportunity to be able to engage in some way and help participate in what that new change looks like, then by default, that ensures that we have less change resistors as well. The only thing I would say about all of this, though, and this actually does relate also to what's happening in the world at the moment, is that we must always make sure, because at the end of the day, as much as we can do all of these great things, like digitization for our employees, we must always make sure that we have really good, strong employee assistance programs, resilient workshops, for example, to be able to help facilitate with the change in terms of that emotional support that some people may need. That said, resilience workshops can also be put online and facilitated through these very things that we're doing now. So I might leave it at that. Thanks, Phil.
Okay, thanks, Belinda. Okay, so really appreciate the opportunity to hear directly from the panel. So thank you to Andrew, Belinda and David for your points and your responses to it. I'll just go through some of the questions that we were getting through the Q&A. Just reminding everyone, if you've got a question, use the Q&A box, not the chat box. Q&A box is where we monitoring questions. So we do have a large list of questions, so I suspect we may not be able to get through all of them, but I'll do. Okay, I'll direct this one to Andrew. Got a question here. How do you see, and this is from Georgia Brandy, how do you see the procurement professional collaborating with the technical change leaders in the organisation?
Yeah, constantly. Fundamentally, a lot of the procurement activity is tied up with systems, and so it's fundamentally important that we are always maintaining connectivity with change innovators within the business. And as I was saying with the plant management digitisation project I'm working on at the moment, the IT area has been a key area for expertise in this way, and they have brought the application to the table, and I've effectively led the process and coordinated the business to create the content that we want to build in the application. So building relationships with our technical leaders is key, and obviously in a digitisation project, just about in all cases, you'll be involving the IT area, and so IT would be a very strong relationship to be had a strong relationship with. Hopefully that answers the question.
All right. Thank you, Andrew. I'll go to David for this one. Driving digital change in a business that still has a very active procurement model or function. What's your recommendation around techniques to get engagement from the executive level to assist in driving that change? And it touches on Belinda's earlier comments around resistance.
You know what, I think the best suggestion or best recommendation I have on that is around a business case. You know, anytime you're doing change, anytime you have a project, you always want to clearly identify why. You know, why am I doing this? Why am I entering this project? Why am I entering this contract? This bringing in a new supplier? What am I trying to get out of it? What is my benefit, you know, of coming from this? And, you know, if there's one thing that the senior executives can relate to, it's whether it's bottom line profit, savings, efficiency, you know, effective reduction of effort. And so anytime you go into a project, even if it's a contract negotiation, if you can identify what the end game is, you know, what are we getting out of this? What is the benefit to all? Then it becomes easier for people to relate to and accept, and particularly senior management. So if I would go to senior management and say, hey, I want $2 million to do this digitalization, you know, project, you know, if they're not comfortable, if they're not savvy on the, you know, what it is that you're trying to do, you know, you're going to get the resistance, you're going to get the change. If I can break that down and say, I want $2 million, and here's what we're going to do, it's going to end up with, you know, affecting bottom line profits by 10%. It's going to reduce your headcount by X amount. It's do this, and that, you know, and you put it into terms that they can understand. You know, that's when you start to win over that reluctant person and start to get them on board and helping you actually to drive the change that you see. So I think, you know, that's when you have a resistance, particularly in the senior management, if you can focus on what is the objective and what's the end result of meeting that objective for you, and I hate to say it, monetize that, put a value to it, you know, that will certainly help when you're dealing with that executive level.
Okay, fantastic. Belinda, we've got two questions here that sort of relate to the same topic. It's about change fatigue. What's your recommendations about, you know, with digital, and we all know it with our phones and having email access from our phone, our mobile phones, how work can touch us or connect to us at any point of day, which is fantastic, but also comes with a lot of cons, a lot of challenges there of managing our time away from work, our work-life balance, but also the sort of overload of information that can come using email and you talk to Slack and etc. So how do we manage, or what's some suggestion about as a change agent to better manage that fatigue, and especially today where everyone's going through quite a bit of change in just going from a work office to a home office sort of landscape. Suggestions? Oh, Belinda?
I've just realised my apologies. I had muted myself.
Thank you.
Thanks, Phil. Yes, very challenging times, obviously, at the moment. I just want to take it back a little bit of a step, though, because you're right, information overload is happening now, but it's happened for a while, and there's always been, I just need to move this out of the procurement space. If you think of a general transformation project, for example, you're dealing with potentially somewhere between 5 and 10 different streams of change. So it's not just procurement, it's HR, it's finance, there's potentially centralisation going on, and everyone's just drawing breath with respect to what that's going to look like, and then another part of the organisation will bring in another change. So that has been quite commonplace for a while. So I think one of the key elements that always must be looked at and never underestimated is during that initial strategy of change, what we need to make sure we do is we make sure that we, as change people, that we are aware of all of the other changes that are going on in organisations, and that we are also aware of what sorts of things in the digitisation space they are using also. Overlaying that view and those looking at doing the analysis or deep dive in terms of what's already happening in the organisation. One of the key things, your communication plans and obviously also this would be in the change management strategy, must have is how often and using what mediums you're going to be touching people. Because without that, you're right, you run the risk of one person getting 7 different types of information 7 different ways. So that certainly has to be very clear and considered. The other piece I think about, I've done this a few times with some organisations now, is running resilience workshops. And I think what helps when you do something like that, when there is large scale change, it talks about how you can switch off and how you can do things in order to reduce the activity in your brain that is going on because of all of the information. And some people arguably do like looking at their email at 2 in the morning. Personally not recommended, but if that's what works for someone, then perhaps that's okay. But others may not want to do that. So I think it's worth having time to just sit down and think about what it is that works for you and when does it work for you to turn off. And I'm thinking already, for example, at the minute, we've got here in the state of Victoria anyway, we've got large amounts of children at home and many of us are working. And so how do we get our 8 hours worth of work done in one day, plus homeschool children, plus do all of the other things we need to do? And so that's what I mean by having the ability to be flexible with that. So maybe you do read your emails from 9 till 10 at night because you're homeschooling children from 9 till 10 in the morning. So whatever works for you, but making sure that you have an ability to be able to step back and switch off and absolutely do that. And then, of course, there are all the other good things that employee assistance programs and, like I said, resilience programs offer, which is working through when you can get exercise, how best it is to get exercise, eating properly, sleeping properly. All of those sorts of very good things need to be considered in order to be able to manage all of this. So I'm hoping that answers those 2 questions.
Thank you. Now, I've got a question. I'll go to Andrew, and I think because of time, we'll make this the last question. And it's for those who are new in a job, they've just landed a new job, and they're still in the probation period. What's the best way for them to manage change, and how can they work to maintain, relationships and etc. when their role is maybe driving that change during that early stages, and especially where, again, trying to get maybe users, business partners to adopt the change and during those early periods of, you know, it might be a 3-month probation, etc., this new staff member has to get them on board. Any suggestions of how they can help manage that period, that duration, that change?
Yeah, okay. Really, I would be a strong encourager of engaging with people, obviously, and personal engagement rather than email. Email has its position, but really face-to-face contact is generally, I find, the best way to bring about a change of activity or change of action which you're wanting to do. So that would mean going to approach the individual or individuals and have a discussion about it. And if that doesn't progress, well then, and you're in a probation period and you're concerned about what the implications of that might be, well then it's important to keep your manager informed of where you're at, and they can assist you, and they should support you to achieve the outcomes that you've been set by your manager. So that would be the best route I would suggest. Engagement is the best, and if you can achieve the change without any intervention of anybody else, well, that's the much preferred route. And in that engagement, I generally adopt the rational thinking approach, and if the course of action that you're wanting people to follow is best practice or rational or an improvement, generally people won't stand in the way of good logic, and so that to me is the much preferred route. And then the backup would be via your manager. I hope that answers the question.
Okay, thanks, Andrew.
Yeah.
We've very much coming to the end of our webinar. So really, before I finish up, I'd like to ask each of our 3 panel members, in 1 or 2 words, describe what they see is the benefit or the value of digitalising change management in a procurement context. I'll start with you, Andrew.
Yeah,
yep.
Okay. I mean, the comment that I was wanting to make, which I hadn't yet, I have found this digital change management project one of the most enjoyable projects that I've ever been involved with. It really feels as if we're changing the organisation and for the better, and the engagement from the individuals on the team has now turned from not so interested to very interested, and now people are very excited about the prospect of us going to a digital model. So that would be the main comment that I would make. Yeah.
David?
Yeah, I would say from a procurement perspective, you know, when we touched briefly on sort of the advancement of procurement and what it means to be in procurement, I think as we're seeing suppliers, or what we've always called suppliers, turn more into partners. So, you know, you're not just buying something from them, you're collaborating. And with, you know, change management, the whole key to driving success is, you know, the communications, the collaboration, the understanding of the gives and takes. And in the procurement world, that's exactly where we see things going with supply base. And so this digital transformation is allowing that, you know, collaboration, you know, to grow, which really just fosters that next generation of supplier relationships, and you know, really driving those partnerships, you know, going forward. So I think it's, you know, it's a great direction, and you know, you got to be on board.
Belinda? Mute.
Oops. 3 words: succinct, accurate, and proactive is what I think it does for us.
Excellent. Okay. So in closing, I'd really like to thank our panel, Andrew, David and Belinda. Really appreciate your input. To everyone who's been on the line, on the webinar, I really hope you found today's session valuable. Apologies to those who did put forward questions and we haven't had the opportunity to answer them, but we will be collecting. That's the value of using the QA side, is we can collect the questions and we'll be able to answer those questions when we release. I do know there was a couple of questions in people interested in getting a copy of the presentation from David. So when we release the webinar, we will also make that available along with the answers to a number of these questions. For myself, I think this is becoming the norm. Once again, change is inevitable. That is our life, and procurement drives change just in everything we do. So I think it's just a great opportunity now to adopt and learn something different and test. And this environment, the COVID-19, has really created a new impetus for us to look at something differently and see how we can adopt it and bring it back into the workforce as part of our normal life, using webinars as a means of face-to-face conversation. So, but again, thank you very much for participation and hope for you to join our future webinars that we have. On behalf of CIPS, thank you for joining us. Bye for now.